So most European countries are adopting severe measures to contain the widespread of coronavirus. The only exception is the UK, where Boris Johnson strategizes to develop herd immunity over a long period of months, arguing that lockdowns are ineffective. Which strategy do you believe is most effective, in particular in the Australian context?
Let me put this to you, Bill Botel. This is something that's come up a lot. This question of herd immunity, enormously controversial.
Well, it's extremely controversial because it makes a set of assumptions that are not scientifically evident. Coronavirus is a novel new infection. Nobody is immune to it. There is no immunity like there is to influenza. So the choice you have, do you stop the infections or contain them in advance of them spreading in the community, as was the case in Taiwan and Korea and Singapore and so on? Or do you wait and do very little and then have a massive engulfment, as we've seen in Italy and France and now Spain and the United States, it has to be said? Or apparently in the United Kingdom, do you adopt another policy based on unproven, untested assumptions and effectively make a scientific experiment of your citizens and see how far a virus can spread and see what happens? It seems to me to be an extraordinarily reckless thing to do when we have to hand the tools that obviously work in Asia to make sure that we don't get the problem much in the first place. Now, I would like to know, really, frankly, if the policies promoted by Prime Minister Johnson and his team have been discussed in Australia in the last months, and whether, in fact, we are now living in a country that has more or less adopted the strategies of the herd immunity principle. It would seem to me to be consistent with the failure to plan ahead, to have testing kits, to not worry about social distancing, and to not take any effective measures of the sorts that have been taken in Taiwan and so on, to educate, inform or prevent people the spread of the virus in Australia.
Dr Mukesh,
I'm genuinely interested.
This has obviously come up as well in the conversation about schools and whether they should remain open or shut. I heard the Victorian Chief Medical Officer talking about this idea of herd immunity and that children don't seem to suffer this illness as badly as others. What's your view?
I think that the so-called herd immunity is a cop-out and it stops people taking the right decision, which might be a strong decision. I think that there's two different things about what happens in schools. One is nobody's going to get herd immunity in the schools because there's nobody got the infection, as Bill's just said, and there's no vaccination, so they're not going to get immunity. What you're hoping is the kids won't get sick. And if they stay at home, if they do get sick and go home, the concern is they'll have problems with their grandparents. So that's kind of why you want to potentially keep them in school. But there will come a time when that's no longer tenable. I think we have done things here. We have got states setting up testing centres. And I think that what my organisations are doing is getting all the clinical people working in all the major hospitals together tonight, actually, before coming here, to actually bring some more rigour to the way in which the clinical response is marshalled throughout our hospitals. The woeful disconnect between the people working in the community and working in hospitals and the way that's organised is something that's also being addressed by a different group, because that we need to have a joined-up response. You can't separate people because of they're working in the community or working in the hospital. We're working in the state or nationally. Just
to be clear, because we're getting lots of tweets about this while we're on air tonight, do you think schools should be closed?
I think we're at the point where that will become a decision. It's not for me to make that kind of decision, but I think you'll hear more and more as this start to peak, that will become necessary, whether it's this week, and we've heard about the AFL going to play 4 rounds before they stop and only do 1 round. I don't think we're going to get to 4 rounds, to be honest.
Okay.
Hamish, can I just ask, I don't want to say that I know anything about herd and the virus, and I would always defer to the experts, but one of the points that Mukesh made about not infecting grandparents is a really important one. So we're close to school holidays. If kids could get home and be isolated, we've got to remember that in this country, grandparents provide childcare worth $4.4 billion a year. And in 2017, almost 865,000 children were cared for by a grandparent who was giving an average of 10 hours a week to look after those young people unpaid. If we have children that get the virus and then infect those grandparents, we haven't even begun to think about what the cost of that unpaid labour for childcare would look like. So we need to protect that as much as we need to protect and flatten the curve and actually do the hard work now to protect as many people as possible. But grandparents are doing a lot of heavy lifting in our economy, and we should never forget that.